Web 2.0.
Innovation.
Trend.
Collaboration.
Software.
Metadata.
Got the world turning as fast as it can? Hear how technology can help, legally speaking, with two of the top legal technology experts, authors, and lawyers, Dennis Kennedy and Tom Mile. Welcome to the Kennedy Mile Report here on the Legal Talk Network.
And welcome to episode 191 of the Kennedy Mile Report. I'm Dennis Kennedy in St. Louis.
And I'm Tom Mile in Dallas.
In our last episode, we discussed great tips and ideas for improving your video conferences. It's now that time of year when Tom has just returned from yet another fabulous vacation. That means it's time to talk about traveling with technology. So we thought we'd share some of our new best tips and observations about traveling with technology with our podcast audience. Tom, what's all on our agenda for this episode?
Well, Dennis, in this edition of the Kennedy Mile Report, we will indeed be talking about travel and some of our best tips for traveling with technology. In our second segment, we've got another question from one of our listeners. And as usual, we finish up with our parting shots, that one tip, website, or observation that you can start to use the second that this podcast is over. But first up, traveling with tech. As you mentioned, Dennis, I just got back from a wonderful 2-week vacation in China and Japan. Had a really good time. But you know, this year, when I was planning the technology I was going to take with me, it seemed second nature. I didn't feel quite as stressed out about it. There were one or two things. We'll talk about that. But, you know, for the most part, it was a pretty painless process. Dennis, do you think that there are new things in tech that people ought to know before they travel? Or is it really more the case that we just need to get better at what we already know?
You know, I think I agree with you that it does. I'm packing for a trip now, and it feels like the tech part of it is actually gotten simpler in some ways. And I think it's partially because things are smaller and, and I focus more on like chargers and battery and backup and that sort of thing. But it does seem like it's gotten a bit simpler, and then we're just kind of I'm fine tuning things. Like, so what's the right bag? How do I carry cables? Do I use plastic bags? Do I do this? But it's sort of the more fundamental issue for me as I think about traveling is that for so many years, I would take my personal laptop with me whenever I traveled. And now I almost feel I can get away with just taking the smartphone that will cover me on almost everything I need on the personal side. You know, if I'm going to do work on travel, then I will need a work laptop. But that's the one thing that struck me. And for this vacation trip that I'm packing for, I'm like, I think I just need my phone and an iPad, which I use as a reader. And so I think that to me feels like the big difference is that the phone has become so versatile that the laptop has actually become unimportant. And I think that may be what simplifies and it makes it feel like you have less going on when you're actually packing for travel. So I don't know if you have the same sense. I know you had to slim down a lot what you were taking when you went to China and Japan, but I don't know whether you have the same observation over the last year.
Well, I did actually. I mean, I think that if we're talking about vacation, I think you're right. I think that all I really needed, and I say needed in China or Japan, was a phone. I brought an iPad with me, but for the same reason that you did. I read with it, and I watched videos. I watched movies. I watched TV shows. I downloaded a lot of stuff to my iPad, and I used that because I really didn't want to watch something on a small screen like my phone. But frankly, I could have done it on my phone if I wanted to. If we're talking about traveling with technology for work, though, my take is completely different. There's too much that I need on my laptop that I really do need to bring my laptop with me. I know that some have talked about only bringing a phone with them when they travel for work. I think that's I think that's crazy. I just think that there's too much stuff you need to do. I would probably not do anything less than bringing an iPad with a keyboard so I could be productive. But I think that these days, if you're traveling for fun, I think that we all live on our phones now, and that's pretty much all that you need. Although it does really then come down to the peripherals, the hardware, the chargers, the cables, all of that stuff, which really does take a little bit more thought than just figuring out that you just need a phone.
Right, I think the work thing too, that you do have this sense of the need for redundancy. So when you're talking about that, so even if I'm not traveling and I'm planning to rely on the smartphone, I mean, there's too many times that you cleverly get on a call where where you're going to be talking about a document, and you think you're covered on the smartphone, and you open an attachment and the track changes aren't visible, and people are talking about it. And you go like, well, that wasn't the best move I ever made. So I think that having that backup in the work situation. But I think in the personal situation, you can get away with with a lot less. And so as I'm packing this evening, my notes are things like, the headphones, the chargers, the adapters, the extension cords, the power adapters, so those are, it's almost like my focus is on preserving batteries more so than the technology. And then the other thing that I noticed that I don't bother with anymore, and this is partially because of Dropbox and Evernote and other online storage, is that it seems like in the past there were times I even would take an external hard drive, but always like multiple USB drives. And now that just seems like a security issue to take. I wouldn't want to leave a USB drive behind anywhere. And I, as a practical matter, don't have need for, carrying around documents or other things on a USB drive. So that's sort of part of the bag that was reserved for hard drives and USB drives is kind of empty for me. And it probably gets, taken up with like an extra extension cord these days.
And I this last vacation, I brought 2 cords for my phone, 1 cord for my iPad. I brought a charger for the room. But the thing that I used the most, and the thing that I was happy that I brought the most, was my backup battery. Because when you're walking around, when you're using your phone all the time for either maps or to tell you about this place, or to post pictures on things on social media and things like that, having my phone started to give out near the end of the day, and so it was nice to have a battery. Although mine's a little large, I think I kind of go to something that's got a lot of power. But the Anker line, ANKER line of batteries, they have them in all sizes, and I think they're great batteries to take with you and keep stuff charged in. Obviously, having an adapter in foreign countries is also really critical. But the other part that was the one part for me that was kind of challenging was the data plan and what kind of plan I was going to have. What I found out was I'm a Verizon customer, and Verizon actually has a new feature called Travel Pass. Travel Pass lets you travel on your own plan, the plan that you have here in the United States, for a cost of $10 a day wherever you happen to be. And so I've got unlimited data, and I could use it at as much data as I wanted to while I was over there, except it would start to throttle your speed after you used about 500 megabytes per day. And that wasn't too bad. I really didn't use that much per day, except one day when I accidentally updated a whole bunch of apps and didn't realize it. So it kind of used the data that way. But I wound up using the Travel Pass in China. I was told that it didn't work in Japan, so I made other arrangements, which is in Japan, the big thing right now, and I think it's kind of big in other countries, but Japan, for some reason, it's a lot bigger, is they have a lot of pocket Wi-Fi. So I arranged with a company to deliver a little MiFi device that was connected to a Japanese telephone company, and it was delivered to my hotel when I got there in Japan. It was a just smoking fast Wi-Fi thing that I actually didn't even use my phone the whole time I was there. I just kept it on in the backpack. I kept it on in the room. We watched movies from it. We streamed movies from it. It was just amazingly fast, and it was unlimited data for about I guess around $15 a day is what it translated to, which wasn't too bad if I hadn't been paying double for my Travel Pass. But that for me was the most decision making I had to make about technology on the whole trip.
When you travel internationally, the adapters are so key, and just remind me of time I was traveling in Austria, and I think I had two adapters, and I was just patting myself on the back, because I had charged these things overnight and hotel, and had these things plugged in. And I went to the meeting I was going to, and when I got there, I realized that my adapters were doing the job back in the hotel room, and that basically there was no way for me to plug in. But fortunately, somebody was able to help me. But yeah, you realize like, oh my God, I really do need those adapters everywhere I go.
I didn't realize before I left that Japan's outlets are the same as the United States, so I didn't even need an adapter in Japan. So that was kind of cool. It was nice to not have to worry about it in one place.
And then I think the other thing that I think about again as I get ready to travel is the Wi-Fi situation. And to go back to a recent episode that we did, the whole notion of VPNs, and I don't know what the right term for is. I think of them as mini routers because they're so small that you can put your own router into the wired connection in a hotel room. Create your own Wi-Fi out of that with a router type of firewall. You use a software VPN like we discussed, and I think that gives you a reasonable level of comfort in using public Wi-Fi or hotel Wi-Fi, which I think is a lot of times can give you a fair amount of concern on the security side. And I guess, Tom, you're sort of like in the classic country where you do worry about security on an internet connection in China. So I don't know what steps you took when in that situation.
Well, if I this is where I start to worry about whether I'm going to not be allowed to talk about security anymore, because I am. In China, some wisdom would tell you to bring a burner phone and to bring a burner iPad, and never. And when you're done with it, toss it and never use it again. I didn't do that. I went to China 3 or 4 years ago, and the company that I went with said, we find that as long as you keep it safe with a VPN, then you're okay, and keep it with you all the time. Don't let it fall into the hands of anybody. You're generally okay. And I obviously I don't know whether something got onto my phone or my iPad, but I did use a VPN the whole time I was there. The experience was, I think, almost completely flawless. It worked. I wound up, it's funny, after we had our podcast on VPNs, I went and tried NordVPN because it actually gets in some places better reviews than ExpressVPN. Well, NordVPN doesn't work in China. It wouldn't connect at all in China, and ExpressVPN worked flawlessly. And I was able to get to all the websites that I wouldn't ordinarily get to. I was actually able to stream from sites that would ordinarily let me do that if they knew that I was calling from another country. But it was, I think, a pretty good process. I'm crossing my fingers that my devices are not compromised, but so far I don't really notice anything.
So for me, the big thing, sort of if you talk to any of the legal technologists we know, you get the feeling that they have about 50 different bags that they've tried, and that they're always on a quest for the perfect bag. So I think that's sort of a key part of my technology tips is like, okay, what are you carrying this stuff in, and how is that going to work? I've really gone to backpacks rather than shoulder bags, and where do you put these things together? Do you zippered pockets I think are important, but I think there's always a quest. And Tom, believe it or not, I actually bought a new day pack as my under the seat / technology bag for the trip I'm going on, which is an Osprey day pack that I'm pretty excited to try because it's this combination of small and enough zippered pockets, plus sort of really well designed as a backpack. So I don't know, maybe I'm just bag obsessed, but if I am, I'm not the only one. So I don't know, Tom. I think that's sort of a key part. And I know that you kind of drill down more and trying some of the what I call like the sub bags or zippered boxes as well, and keeping different components or the chargers and the other things organized. So I'm more like throw it into a zippered pocket. I think you go more toward the organizational approach.
Yeah, I am. And when it comes to bags, I kind of am interested in bags too, but I never can decide what I want. So I go with something and I stick with it. I've been a big fan of the Tom Bin line because they're rugged and they last forever. And the backpack I've had for a bunch of years, and you couldn't tell it. It's just such a well-made bag. And so I just had that backpack that I brought with me. I've been struggling with the right kind of cord keeper and things like that. And I'm using one right now from a company called thisisground.com. Very well made. It's very nice leather. It's huge. It's massive. I need to find something else. I really like how it looks, and it's a nice thing, but it's just way too big. So I'm on the lookout. I stopped the Grit-It stuff because the Grit-It was just taking up too much space. I kind of want to consolidate. I want to downsize my cords, but I'm on the lookout now for something new on that.
Then I think the other thing that I think has been the big evolution over the last few years on technology is the move to apps, right? And that follows from saying if the smartphone is your key device, then apps become more important. And then also, there's some app management. It's like picking the right apps and then thinking about how you actually do things. And so, our friends like John Simic and Sharon Nelson, who are really, heavy on the security side, I think we learn from them. So I do this thing that's probably my trait is I don't like when I'm traveling, especially and definitely when I'm on public Wi-Fi, to do anything where I'm separately entering a username or password. And I definitely don't like to do e-commerce or do Amazon orders. I'm really reluctant to that. So that's sort of my own quirk. So traveling, I tend to do a thing where I'll move the apps that I'm going to use more to the home screen of the smartphone, so they're easier for me to get to. And then in some ways, I reduce the number of apps that I might use to kind of key apps. So the social media, the travel type apps, those sorts of things, and kind of get them a little better organized in what I do. And then with the iPad, I'm more using it as an e-reader, and then something I use in the hotel room more commonly while I might be charging up the iPhone after a day, using it as a camera and the other things that I might do. So, Tom, I know that you just had a long trip with and you use apps for all kinds of things and definitely for planning, restaurants and things like that. So I don't know if you have some new ideas or new favorite apps that you want to share with people.
So I do. There are a couple of apps and there's some old standbys. I mean, TripIt has been my app of choice for keeping my itinerary and sharing it with my family when I'm gone. A lot of people don't necessarily like to share their Google inbox with another company. I'm okay with that. I mean, even if you're not okay with that, you can still forward all of your reservations and confirmations to TripIt, and it will keep a very nicely formatted itinerary for you and notify you when there are changes to that itinerary. That especially if you're a premium member. But there's a new app on the scene that I think is really interesting, and I'm trying to use it more. It's called Google. It's Google Trips. Now Google, because they have Gmail, and if you're a Gmail user like me, they're already looking in your mailbox. They're going to put the same information into itinerary for you. So it basically found all that information. It created a trip for almost all the towns that I went to. It didn't have all of them, but then for each town, you can download a city guide, places to go, tours to take, how to get around town, transportation, incredibly helpful guides that I want to make more use of. There are two apps from the government that if you're traveling internationally, I absolutely recommend. The first is the State Department's Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. You basically tell them where you're going to be, where you're going to stay, and then you'll get alerts if something happens in that country while you're there, to where you can either get to an embassy or get help or get something to happen. And so notifying them while you're gone, I think, is a great idea. The other one is called, it's from the Center for Disease Control. It's called called Be Well, and you plug in where you're going to be, and it's going to give you an idea of the different shots you're going to need, the different types of precautions you're going to need to take wherever you happen to go. I wholly recommend having a transit app. So wherever you happen to go, plug in the name of the city and then either type subways or trains or whatever. I absolutely used them in Shanghai and Beijing and Tokyo. They were amazingly helpful. I tried to use Google Maps. It wasn't always the best app to use. So having those transit apps are great. And then I'm going to talk about Google Photos a little bit more in our second segment, but I'll say that Google Photos, again, is proving to me to be just the best photo management tool in the world. I would take photos on my phone all day long. I'd get back to the hotel room, I'd connect to the Wi-Fi, and within 3 minutes, all my photos were backed up to Google, and they had made some albums for me, they had made some movies for me, and now they've recently announced that they will create photo books for you, either hardcover or softcover photo books out of your photos. I've just gotten one from our trip, and I want to see how it looks. I'll have to let you know on a future podcast if I like the result.
Yeah, and so I have two other thoughts on apps. So one echoes what you were saying. Is so one of the things I do before I travel anywhere is I just go to the app store and just do a search on the name of the city that I'm going to be in, and then I take a look at those apps and at least temporarily, because I'll take them off. If there's city guides, if there's bike trail guides, if there's hiking guides, if there are other local newspaper, maybe a local TV show or local TV news app, I'll just grab those things because they could be handy. So just kind of add it to the list. It's kind of like one thing you can do really quickly to kind of help you, figure out what you might do. That's really good for like what concerts or shows might be in town. It can help you find that in an easy way, and then you'll have that with you. So that's a really good thing to do with apps along those lines. And then I guess the other thing with apps is to say, what is it that I'm going to be doing? So, and maybe it's the time to try a new app. So if I'm going to a place where maybe I know I'm going to take a lot of photos, I might experiment with a new photo app. Or as Tom said, that if you're going to take a lot of photos, you might experiment with a new way of storing or posting photos. So you might, and cycling, other activities. That's another thing that I look to apps for. I think the other thing, Tom, that I find useful is the whole online storage world, Dropbox, Evernote, and other online storage. And I think that's great, especially if you're traveling internationally, that you can put up the copies, you can store copies of your passport, credit card information, things like that securely. And if you would have a problem, then you can pull copies of that. Keep your itinerary there, important numbers, or other ways to do that. But those become an easy way. And if there's something that might come up that you need to work on or might have access to, throwing it up on Dropbox or Evernote is a good way that you can reach it. And that's another way you might store, say, like articles about a place you wanted to go to, reviews, that sort of thing. And so depending on the one you pick, that can be really useful.
Yeah, the one area of apps that I didn't mention because I didn't use them. I'd like to, but I just haven't. I just don't have the energy to do it. There are a lot of cool journaling apps for trips. One of them is called Journey. That's Journi. But there are a number of other ones that will basically create travel journals for you. You take a picture, it captures where you are, it shows a map, it allows you to write in, here's what I did today, here's how my day was. If I were more of a writer, if I really wanted to write a lot while I was on vacation, I think these would be really fantastic ways of memorializing a trip that you're on, and there are just so many of them out there. I think there's more for iPhone than Android, which is probably another reason why I don't use them. But and then I guess the other thing that I used quite a bit, at least when it was time to communicate with home, was rather than use the phone to call home, I either FaceTimed over Wi-Fi or when I got to Japan, for some reason my phone actually wouldn't work, and so I made a couple of Skype phone calls while I was over there. And again, it's nice to have a backup way to communicate with people, either because you don't want to pay for the cost to call people, or maybe calling isn't possible where you might happen to be going.
Yeah, and I think the alternative communication is great. So the Skypes, the Vibers, other things that where you can tell somebody else to install the app if they don't use it. Viber, I think, was really popular. When my daughter was in Switzerland, that was one way that we communicated. The other thing I think is a password manager. We recommend for everything, but it's really great for the credit card information, PIN numbers, hotel programs, things like that. The things that you never have and you need that number, and so you can use a password manager to store some of those things. And it's a great way where you have your passwords with you and you've not written them down or done anything like that, but it's sort of in a very secure area. So I don't know, Tom, do you want to do like a little lightning round and wrap up with our favorite tips, or do you have a couple of other things that you want to highlight?
No, I think, and I'm not sure that I have a lightning round of tips. I mean, my biggest tip, and maybe Dennis, when you talk, I'll be inspired to come up with some other ones. But really, my biggest tip from this trip is don't let choosing technology for a trip become overwhelming. Use the technology that you think you're going to need. I think it makes sense to plan ahead of time, figure out what you're going to do, what you're going to need it for. But you don't need to have an app for every single thing. You don't need to have technology for everything you might do, because you're on the vacation to have a good time. Now, for me, having that technology helps me have a good time, so I enjoy it. But if you don't want to let tech take it over, then choose your technology wisely and say, here are the 5 or the 2 or the 1 tool that I want to be able to use while I'm over there, and then really make use of that while you're there. But then just focus on having a good time on your trip.
So 2 things that I want to mention. So I always mention great headphones and noise canceling headphones. I use Bose. There's a number of possibilities out there. I lately think a lot about 2 services and apps, one called Overdrive and one called Scribd, Scribd. And it shows kind of the versatility, why the phone and the tablet has become so versatile, and why I don't think you really need a laptop most of the time. But so Overdrive allows you that if you're a member of your public library, you can download ebooks and audiobooks on a rental basis. And Scribd is similar, but you're paying about $9 a month, and then you can get ebooks and audiobooks. And so I like the idea that in addition to podcasts, I can download for free or as part of my Scribd subscription audiobooks, and that gives me another option on the plane if I want to dig into a book that I might not otherwise read, and I'm not I feel it more like listening to it than reading it. So I think that shows the versatility, and then it helps you think, I think, in terms of how can I pack even lighter and what technology is really essential, and how can I kind of get multiple uses out of this same technology. So, which I think is, part of travel, is that you don't want the technology to weigh you down or anything else to weigh you down. You want to be able to focus on what you're traveling to do.
Well, and you did make me think of the one thing that I didn't talk about, which was the other things. You talk about audiobooks and regular books and articles and magazines. I wanted to watch TV shows and movies while I was out there, and it is so simple and easy now. If you're a Netflix subscriber or an Amazon Prime Video subscriber, you can go into the store. Now, make sure you do it before you leave. Don't do it after you're on the road. Do it ahead of time. So this is where the planning comes in. But I went into Netflix, and there's an area said available for download area, and it had a bunch of TV shows that I needed to catch up on. And so I essentially spent all of my time on the plane binge watching television shows, both coming and going, and watched 10 to 15 different episodes of television while I was on there, and it was great. And I didn't need to have an internet connection. I could just watch it there. Once you start watching it, you've got a short amount of time. You've got like 24 to 48 hours, and then it deletes it from your device. It doesn't want it. You can't keep it on there forever. But it's nice to be able to do that for free as part of your subscription, and then take it wherever you happen to be without an internet connection. All right, before we move on to our next segment, let's take a quick break for a message from our sponsor.
Looking for a process server you can trust? ServeNow.com is a nationwide network of local pre-screened process servers. ServeNow works with the most professional process servers in the industry, connecting your firm with process servers who embrace technology, have experience with high-volume serves, and understand the litigation process and rules of properly effectuating service. Find a pre-screened process server today. Visit www.servenow.com.
And now let's get back to the Kennedy Mile Report. I'm Tom Mile.
And I'm Dennis Kennedy. We've got another question, but no audio this time. We really like getting the audio questions, so be sure to send yours in. Let's go right to the question. The question is, it's probably no longer a matter of if, but when. So when are we going? Are we actually going to be alive when the impact of AI truly starts to be felt? Tom, you get to answer first.
So I'm going to answer by talking about Google I/O, which is the annual Google Developers Conference that just took place right before we recorded this episode. If you read the technology reports of it, the tech journalist reports of it, they'll all say that it was not a very exciting conference, but it continued with Google's mission, which is that AI, that artificial intelligence, is the next great platform. And so the types of strides that Google is making with AI, I think, answers the question, which is it's already being felt. Even if it's only in small ways, or if you consider them to be in small ways, I think, Google aside, we're already seeing how Watson is changing the practice of law. Several law firms are licensing the tool to do that. But let's just talk about some things that Google is doing real quick. I mentioned Google Photos earlier. Google Photos is now going to give you the option that if you take a picture with somebody else in the picture, it's already doing facial recognition, which you may find is creepy, and there may be people who don't like that. But the facial recognition can obviously identify who individuals are. And then what's interesting is that if you share that picture with your friend or vice versa, then Google learns that your friend is also on Google Photos. Then it actually now has the ability to automatically share pictures with your friends if they're in them. So if you take a picture, it's automatically going to share that picture with your friends. You don't have to worry about doing it yourself. Again, there's no friction. There's nothing to do on your part. Some people may find that's a little too creepy, but I think it's helping manage your relationship with this person by doing something that you may have actually forgotten to do. But what they're doing in general, and Dennis, you may talk more intelligently about this, is kind of huge with AI. They have a tool and they have a process called TensorFlow. And the best way to describe it in a way that I understand is it's an algorithm infrastructure for algorithms. So it's a whole bunch of artificial intelligence recipes that are bundled together and managed by the same kind of a recipe that's smart enough to decide which algorithm in the bundle is going to work best in your situation. So you pose a question, or you have something that needs to be solved, and it's going to try to figure out which tool is best for you. And one way that they're going to make this work is applying it to the products that they offer you. I don't know if any of you watch Silicon Valley, the comedy show on HBO, but they've recently had an episode where they introduced an app that they called See Food, S-E-E Food, and they said that you just pointed at food and it would identify it. And on Silicon Valley, it didn't do a very good job. It either said it was a hot dog or not a hot dog. That was the extent of its intelligence. But with a number of years ago, Google purchased a tool called Word Lens, which allowed you to point your camera at pictures and it would translate them into other languages. And I used that a little bit in China and Japan, but now they're just calling it Lens. So you can point it and it'll do all kinds of things. You point it at a flower, it'll tell you what kind of flower. You point it at a stadium or a conference venue, it's going to tell you about upcoming events at that location, and it's going to provide a way for you to buy tickets. You can point your camera at the sticker on your router, and Google's going to identify the network and automatically log you in, which is kind of creepy and is a good argument for having change the password on your router. But the fact that it can do that, I think, is really amazing. The fact that it's smart enough to do it, and this is already happening. So it's not a matter of in our lifetime; it's happening right now, and I think there's just going to be more of it. I think it's really exciting. I think we have a lot to look at, but I'm excited by it.
Well, I mean, this question kind of expresses the running gag about artificial intelligence, that it's always just around the corner. So artificial intelligence, the term and the idea was kind of coined in 1942, and it's kind of bubbled up at different times. I know that in 1982, I was in law school in a class where we were talking about what would be the liability if an artificial intelligence tool made a decision and there was a car accident. Like, who would you sue? Well, you hear that question all the time about self-driving cars today, which is 30 plus years later. So it's always been in this sort of the ecosystem. And when is AI really going to be here? And in the podcast we did on AI, we talked about this, how artificial intelligence sort of, to me, unfairly has the goalposts moved on it all the time. So every time it accomplishes something, like beats humans in chess, or then it needs to beat a world champion, then it needs to meet them in Go rather than chess. So it never quite gets to what people are comfortable with. But we also talked about Kevin Kelly's book, The Inevitable, where he talks about AI in a way that I really like, which is talks about not just one general artificial intelligence, but this sort of notion that there are many artificial intelligences and what he calls artificial smartness. And so I like to use the example of anti-lock brakes, which can do a lot better job of braking in a difficult situation than I ever could. So I think we're seeing the filtering out of some aspects of artificial intelligence. And so I think it's a matter of where you look and what you're looking for. So I do think the answer to this one is we're really going to feel a significant impact in our lifetime, which, let me be generous and say, put out at least 20 more years for all of us. So and probably some significant in the near term. And so things like TensorFlow, the machine learning, chatbots, the combinations of all these things, and then I think that notion of specialized AI, and then how that gets converted. So, Tom, when you talk about word lens, or as they call it, lens, and you're describing what it does, that's a classic example of augmented reality. And it's happening on the phone, as opposed to saying, oh, augmented reality requires like some sort of Google Glass or something over your eyes. So, really interesting things happening, and I think it's just a matter of saying artificial intelligence, if we kind of move away from this notion, this monolithic general artificial intelligence, there's some really cool stuff happening in a lot of different areas, and sort of changing our perspective will let us see a lot more things that are happening, and they're probably going to happen pretty darn quickly. So now it's time for our parting shots. That one tip, website, or observation you can use the second this podcast ends. Tom, take it away.
So hat tip to our friend Sharon Nelson for posting this on her blog, where I caught it. NIST, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, recently issued some revised guidelines on password security, and they have some changes here. They basically have admitted passwords are too hard, or administrators are making passwords too hard by requiring us to jump through too many hoops with them, saying that if the bad people really want the passwords, they can get to those really complicated passwords a lot easier than hacking through them. And so they don't require those anymore. They say that the minimum length for a password should be 8 digits, which seems a little small for me. And they really talk a lot about two-factor authentication as being critically important. I agree with all that. The one thing I didn't see there was, well, if we're not doing complicated passwords, then what do you recommend for the passwords? I need to read through more of it. I want to see what it is, but I think it makes for an interesting read. We'll put a link to it in the show notes.
And this is sort of a technology issue, but sort of not, and it's something that we face. So if you think about it as technology makes us feel more productive, we have even more of a tendency to say, yes, I'll take more things on. And I think for a lot of us, it's hard to say no to things. It's certainly without feeling guilty, and especially in certain situations. So I'm recommending a blog post called "How to Say No Without Feeling Guilty: 6 Secrets from the Experts," and we'll put a link to the show notes for that one. But you can search on the name. But it has sort of 6 ways that you can kind of easily say no to people in ways that make sense and they will understand and without offending them. And for me, and I think for others listening to, just experimenting with a few of those and finding that you can clear a little space so you don't hear yourself saying the yes, voicing the word yes when your mind is saying no, no, no is definitely worth it.
So that wraps it up for this edition of the Kennedy Mile Report. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. You can find show notes for this episode at tkmreport.com. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to our podcast in iTunes or on the Legal Talk Network site, where you can find archives of all of our previous podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, please email us at tkmreport@gmail.com or send us a tweet. I'm at Tom Mile, and Dennis is at Dennis Kennedy. And Dennis is right. We love getting your audio questions. So please submit audio questions to the Legal Talk Network if you're interested in having us air it on the show sometime. So until the next podcast, I'm Tom Mile.
And I'm Dennis Kennedy, and you've been listening to the Kennedy Mile Report, a podcast on legal technology with an internet focus. Help us out by telling a couple of your friends and colleagues about the podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Kennedy Mile Report. Check out Dennis and Tom's book, The Lawyer's Guide to Collaboration Tools and Technologies, Smart Ways to Work Together, from ABA Books or Amazon. And join us every other week for another edition of the Kennedy Mile Report, only on the Legal Talk Network.